As the images of Minneapolis burning took over the news this week, I immediately wondered two things. First, despite this controversy happening under the jurisdiction of an entirely Democratic city council, with the only voice of dissent coming from the left flank of the Green Party, a council for a city under the leadership of Justin Trudeau South, represented by Ilhan Omar in Congress, with laws faithfully prosecuted by Keith Ellison, despite nothing but progressives running this place, how long until someone tries to blame Trump? And then Maxine Waters swooped in and answered that question before I could even finish asking it.
I'm thinking about the way that the president conducts himself. In a way, he's dog whistling. And I think that they're feeling that they can get away with this kind of treatment.
He dog whistles for people to commit crimes before he calls in the feds to investigate and potentially prosecute those crimes in a hurry. It's all a very complicated and elaborate scheme, achievable only by a man who's far too stupid to handle basic responsibility otherwise. But second, after months of condemning protesting across the country to end arbitrary economic shutdown as irresponsible, dangerous, and theoretically violent, will media apply that same scrutiny to these scenes of protest that are irresponsible, dangerous, and actually violent? Wishful thinking, but of course not. The same people cheerleading tyranny yesterday are now cheerleading anarchy today. The same morning news shows that say protesters in Michigan stormed the Capitol
hours after protesters stormed the state capitol, demanding an end to the stay-at-home order.
Even though they didn't storm it, they followed all laws and even submitted to temperature checks at the point of entry. Those same news shows are now saying these scenes in Minneapolis are properly characterized as protests, not riots. And his colleague at MSNBC is following the wording rules no matter what. Pay no attention to the giant fire behind the curtain.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly.
If scenes like this that I'd otherwise think must have come from Syria or Afghanistan don't meet the definition of a riot, I'd like these reporters to explain to me what does. But maybe they're just crediting these rioters with rioting responsibly in the midst of a pandemic. Thank you for doing your part and wearing a mask when you can't socially distance, while burning down your city, or really taking advantage of that liquor store's free sample policy. Are these people actually trying to do Dr. Fauci a solid while they devastate multiple city blocks? Or are they just taking advantage of the fact that yesterday's criminal face covering is today's mark of the good guy? You decide. But seriously speaking, the principles at issue in this case are not difficult to square. Yes, the available footage of the death of George Floyd looks clearly wrong. Yes, it looks like the sort of conduct that should be charged. Yes, due process should be maintained during the investigation and prosecution of those charges. And yes, the right to protest in favor of those charges peacefully, without violating the rights of others, should be supported, just as it should be supported in Michigan for those in favor of economic freedom. And that is the perspective of a huge portion of Americans. The right to protest for or against whatever you like should be maintained. But that right does not include the theft and destruction of other people's property. You have the right to voice your views publicly, but you didn't win a free shopping spree at Target, and there's no reason these two things are linked. You can support one while opposing the other. In fact, that is the consistent, principled, and moral thing to do. Except we're now being told that view is incoherent. It's inconsistent, it's contradictory, it's hypocritical to support the Michigan protesters, who committed no crime, by the way, but then condemn the Minneapolis rioters who have now committed more crimes than can ever be brought to justice. This according to Don Lemon on CNN, who says these things are exactly the same. They're both just people fighting for liberty, and so you must support both.
Just like those people who were on the State House, is saying, I want to get a haircut, I want to open up my business, I want to be able to carry a gun to the State House, loaded weapon. It is my right as an American. I'm fighting for my liberty. These people are fighting for their liberty. So if you can understand wanting a haircut, not wanting to wear a mask, wanting to go in a store and be able to cough on anyone, then you should understand these people who are frustrated and who are protesting on the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota. Liberty is not just for white people. It is for black people. It is for Asian people. It is for all Americans. So if you're going to fight for your liberty, fight for these people's liberty as well.
People don't oppose the rioting based on race. People oppose the rioting because property rights are an important piece of the liberty that you suddenly claim to value. The right to your property is just as important against the tyranny of a violent mob as it is against the tyranny of the state. That's why the people who believe in liberty, as you describe, support the speech in this case, or at least the right to it, but not the theft or destruction. So despite the straw man, we actually do fulfill the bargain with which you challenge us. We do support the right to protest for liberty, regardless of race and regardless of perspective. We support the peaceful and law-abiding in Minneapolis just as much as we support the peaceful and law-abiding in Michigan. The question is, do you? Because if we have to support both, then so do you, Don. So when can we expect the retraction of your prior opposition to the Michigan protesters?
In the meantime, there are people who are keeping your cities going, keeping your loved ones alive, and you want to get a haircut? Who the hell do you think you are? What is wrong with people? I don't understand what is wrong with people. Stay at home. Yeah, you have the right to protest. You have the right to protest. Everyone does.
You know what's coming. But
I don't want to hear from those people who are out there protesting with guns. Don't criticize people who are taking a knee at a ball game and entertainment things. Say, I don't want people protesting at a ball game. When people who are peacefully protest, don't give me that. When you're out there protesting with guns.
Well, why not? Why can't they give you that? I thought if we support the fight for liberty for one group, we must support it for others. Or do you only support liberty for certain races, Don? Is that why? Because I was told that was bad too. By you. Because by the way, these supposed gun-toting racists you smear are anything but your caricature. They are actually the exact sort of people with principled, consistent, nuanced perspectives that you demand to see but don't even acknowledge when they're in plain sight. Check out these two dudes standing guard at a Minneapolis business identified only as free Americans.
Tell me who you are.
Well, I mean, free Americans, yeah.
And what are you doing today?
Cops are a lot less likely to try and tread on people's rights when there's other armed Americans with them. So we figured it's about damn time that or at least I figure that it's about damn time some heavily armed rednecks stood with fellow citizens.
These guys are out here with machetes and shattered windows trying to keep looters out of the business because cops can't get in here. And so, I figured before they were cops, they were just Americans. So bottom line, justice for Floyd, and I hope they stop looting at some point.
Definitely don't agree with the looting.
Yeah, no, looting.
But we do agree with the cause for the protest.
Yeah, definite protest.
That is exactly the sort of consistency that CNN would hear if they bothered to listen. They might even see that perhaps these guys have a point, that armed civilians tend to be a pretty effective deterrent from the violation of rights by either violent mobs or the police. It's a point that Don acknowledges with Chris Cuomo before somehow concluding that we should disarm ourselves instead.
When it's white people with guns and they're out and they're angry and they're faces with cops.
Didn't see any of that.
Everybody's civil.
Didn't see any of that.
But
flag burning, spitting in police officers' faces, yelling at police officers armed with heavy weaponry. Didn't see any of that. Did you see anybody with their foot on anybody's neck?
I mean, you've heard it. People make it a joke, but it's funny because it's tragic and sad. If black people said, let's all go out and get guns and start to protest, that would be the fastest change of gun law culture in this country.
Yeah.
Okay, so follow the logic here. Premise 1, police tyranny is a problem. Premise 2, less police tyranny is observed when faced with armed opposition. Now, you may be thinking the correct conclusion is arm yourself to reduce police tyranny. But no, you'd be wrong. That's incorrect. The correct conclusion is surrender even more power to the police you otherwise claim are tyrannical. And if you don't understand why, well, that's because you're an illogical hypocrite who is also racist. Checkmate. And let's not fail to acknowledge how ironically and hypocritically racist their argument actually is. Are you saying that black people don't legally own or buy guns in this country? Because they do, and they exercise those rights in both of these cases. The two guys we saw earlier were part of a 4-man team. Their two counterparts were black. Seems really unlikely these guys would advocate for gun control against black people if they're standing with armed black guys on the principle of self-defense. Nearby in St. Paul, armed black dudes were guarding a black-owned business from exactly the same looter threat this week.
They said run up in here and see what happened.
on fan out here with them blacks on them.
They not playing.
Blacks on them. Run up in this black on, nigga. You see that black on? Run up in this bitch.
And I assure you, I, for one, am not going to run up in there and see what happens. And I bet you won't either. Here are armed black men protesting the death of George Floyd at the Michigan State Capitol this week, open carrying rifles in the way you say will bring a crackdown upon them, except it didn't. They came, they protested, they were armed, they left, and no authoritarian racists tried to stop them. And in either case, I am listening closely for the sounds of conservatives or libertarians or any liberty-minded Americans now suddenly calling for gun laws to get these rebel blacks under control. I am listening very, very carefully, but I don't hear a damn thing, just crickets. Because those people don't exist. They're an invention. The people you're smearing do stand for and uphold the principles on which you say we fail. It's only in a fantasy land projected from an out-of-touch New York studio that we don't. Universal principles are racist, riots are peaceful, protests are violent, and it's any opinion otherwise that's hypocritical. All of this under the motto that is the greatest doublespeak of them all. The most trusted name in news. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel always. Appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below and especially over on Twitter. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chatting my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.